The topic of our study is Information and Communications Technology as a tool for improving the quality of methodical work in the first link of the system of education. Next slide. We would like to begin our speech with a quote from Aristotle. Good there and everywhere depends on compliance with two conditions: the correct definition of the ultimate goal and finding the appropriate means leading to the ultimate goal. We consider it an important question at the present time and in the context of the conference. Next slide. Quality of methodical work of preschool educational institutions presupposes diagnosis as the main principle of methodical support. Diversification of interactive forms and methods of methodical support, system of methodical support of pedagogical staff, all of these components are interrelated and compulsory for use in modern ICT in the activities of the teaching staff. Next slide. On the slide, the scientists who were engaged in problems of introduction of ICT in educational process are mentioned. You can get acquainted in more detail with their researches in our article. Next slide. Experimental research on this issue was carried out in several stages. At the ascertaining stage of the experiment, our tasks were to study the level of ICT competence of teachers, working in the first link of the system of education, to study the level of technical support of preschool institutions, and to study the state of methodical support for the use of ICT in the educational process of the first link of the educational system. Next slide. To accomplish these tasks, we have used such research methods as observing the organization of the educational process on the use of ICT in preschool institutions, observation of the organization of methodical work with teachers using ICT technologies, selective conversations with teaching staff, questionnaire survey of preschool teachers. Observation, the main method of the research, was used in the institutions of the first link of the system of education during organizing and conducting various types of practices and practical classes with students. Next slide. The results of long and selective observations gave the reasons to affirm that there is no system of ICT in the use during the organization of educational process. More often, videos of their fragments are shown to children using teachers' gadgets. Traditionally, ICT is used on demonstrative forms of work with children and parents using their own equipment. There are several reasons for this. In the best case, having one smart board or one or two stationary computers in the administration offices for the whole institution. Lack of proper systematic technical support of the mentioned equipment and provision of its components. Low level of technical competence of preschool methodologists and directors of preschool institutions. Lack of a training system for educators on the use of ICT in the educational process, and accordingly the fear of teachers to apply it, the absence in the methodical offices of kindergartens of navigators in the electronic catalogues of various services useful for teachers, and so forth. The next method used in the work is observing the organization of methodical work with teachers using ICT. The results of the observations made it possible to state that only single seminars, master classes are devoted to this issue. The next method of research is selective conversations with preschool teachers. In all first-link educational institutions covered by the survey, 26 institutions, teachers were asked several questions to discuss. The first one: are you ready to constantly use ICT in the educational process? The second: does your institution or you personally have a portfolio of necessary and useful services for working with children? The third: do you need methodical assistance and technical support for the use of ICT in everyday work? 75% of the respondents gave an affirmative reply, but on the assumption of prior learning, 20% of teachers gave a negative answer. Among the reasons were called their own inability and fear of technology, a long-standing habit of using of visual aids, a reluctance to rise professionally compared to other colleagues. 5% refused to give a direct answer. Only 15% of preschool teachers up to 30 years old answered affirmatively to the second question. 75% of teachers admitted that they did not understand the question and had never heard of it. 10% refused to give a direct answer. 84% of teachers answered affirmatively to the third question in all preschool educational institutions. 6% gave a negative answer. 10% refused to give a direct answer. Our analysis of the conversations gives us reasons to state that most educators are ready for the use of ICT in the educational process and desire to receive methodical help on this issue. The results of selective conversations with teaching staff are presented in the slide. Next slide. We also determined level of ICT proficiency. Next slide. And also ICT that teachers use most often in their activities in percent. The results of the experimental phase of the research prove that preschool teachers are acquainted with modern ICT, partly use it, but need methodical assistance and technical support for the use of ICT in their professional activities. The next slide. All the formative stage of the experiment, our tasks were conducting a series of methodical events with teachers of preschool educational institutions on the use of ICT technologies in the educational process and the documentation of teachers. Development of methodical recommendations for creation and filling of a portfolio with necessary useful services for work with children. Creation of an electronic catalog of publications of professional periodicals on this issue to help preschool teachers. Selection of Lifehacks of a preschool teaching center for use of ICT in methodical work with teachers and educational work with children, etc. The next slide. We, together with students, have prepared and conducted a series of workshops in preschool educational institutions that were involved in our study on the use of ICT in the educational process. The topics are presented on the slides to help teachers and methodologists of the first link of the system of education in organizing methodical work on the use of ICT. We created and offered an electronic annotated catalog of publications on the identified issue in professional periodicals for 2016-2019. Currently, a very wide source base has been created to help teachers of preschool educational institutions, in particular the website of the Institute of Postgraduate Pedagogical Education of Boris Grynchenko Kyiv University, which contains available video instructions, experience of using various internet services, educational videos, and others. It should be mentioned that since none of the ICT are universal, they should not be used thoughtlessly or only as a fashionable trend. The main thing that should be taken into consideration by the methodologist and the director of the institution in the first link of the system of education is what benefit this technology will bring to the preschool teachers, how much their professional competence will increase. The next slide. Thank you for your attention.